was about to say good morning, because that's what it says on my cue card, but good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for inviting us to come and speak at this event. I just want to share something with you. I was travelling up to Manchester last night on one of those wonderful cross-country trains, for anybody that's ever been on one. And next to me, on the table just behind me, was a gentleman doing something that I'm sure you've all experienced on long journeys. He was holding forth on everything to do with his life. He was telling this poor girl sat opposite him about the fact that he was an IT consultant, that the best moment for young people is when they create their first window. But he also then told a story that really connected with some of the things we've been talking about today. And as he'd been a teacher and he'd gone through the education system and he'd obviously been successful, he was talking about his niece. Now, his niece is now apparently 28, I picked up because I hadn't put my headphones on at that point. And at 16, she had left school with absolutely no qualifications whatsoever. She'd had a terrible time as a young person, not enjoyed the educational experience, got herself in with the wrong crowd, got involved in behaviour that could have got her in quite a serious amount of trouble. The story he was now telling, though, was that last year, she graduated as a first-class student from the London School of Economics at the age of 27. And it made me think, when Judith was talking earlier about thinking differently, how differently do we think about the way that young people in particular, from our point of view, will live their lives now? We may all have gone through, many of us, a system that meant we went to school, we may have gone on to further our higher education, and then we got our first job. Actually, there's a lot of evidence in some of the work that's been done around trends for the future that the lives of the young people now will be totally different to the lives that we've led. There's an excellent piece of research that Sport Wales have done called Acting Today for an Active Tomorrow that looks at how lives will be different. And things are shifting so quickly within the digital age that as organisations we really need to think about what is the sporting offer going to be for those young people that we're going to be serving in the future. So, in the time that I have left, I'm just going to share with you some of the learning that we've gained from the work we've done on Doorstep Sport, particularly over the last 3 years with our Doorstep Sport Club programme, some of the difference that's made to the participants and the young people that have been involved, and just present what I think is one of the major challenges for all of us going forwards in a new landscape. It's all about these two. I'm going to leave that as a subliminal message for the end. For those of you who don't know who StreetGames are, and I'm sure there may be a few of you, this is really what we're about. We're about ensuring that, as far as possible, young people who live in the most disadvantaged communities get the same access to sport and physical activity, but critically, the same access to its benefits. And the new strategy that we've talked a lot about this morning is very much about the benefits of sport for those that take part in it. The best example for us is the difference that it makes to young people if they move from doing absolutely nothing in their local area to doing something, which Michael touched on earlier in his health presentation. And the way that we do that is the 3 ways that are outlined on the bottom of the screen. We don't do it on our own. Nobody can deliver this on their own. We work with organisations to look at changing sport. So we work with governing bodies, other organisations that deliver sport, to look at how the sporting offer can be delivered in a way that suits the needs of young people from lower socioeconomic groups who have particular barriers on top of the ones that people who are more affluent also face. We talk about changing lives, so we're looking to see how sport can make a difference to individual development. So the young people who get involved in Doorstep sport programmes will see benefits as individuals, but crucially, it will also change the areas in which they live. Very often the areas that we work in are characterised by low levels of sporting provision, low levels of volunteering, very often not much to do. It's the classic response you get from young people when you talk to them about what's going on in their area. Well, there's nothing to do. Well, actually, in the areas we work in, quite often that can be the case. Fortunately for me, Judith's already covered this, so this will save a bit of time on my presentation. This is really just pointing out the differential between participation in more affluent groups and those who are less affluent. So looking at the NSEC 5 to 8 and NSEC 1 to 4 categories. there is, and Barry touched on this, there's almost what my chief exec calls a double jeopardy. If you're a girl, or if you're from a Black, Asian or minority ethnic background, or if you're disabled. So if you're from a lower socioeconomic group and you have one of those other protected characteristics, you're even less likely to participate. So the need for us of ensuring that sport and the benefits of sport reach this group are absolutely clear. Positively for us, we've seen a huge amount of growth in the number of organisations that want to work with us. That's been said a lot this morning. It's the importance of working with people, not doing to them or doing for them. And the organisations we work with are the experts. We turn the pyramid on its head and say that the people who work in the local communities know what local communities need. We provide them with some of the tools and techniques that can actually support them to do what they're doing better, but we don't pretend that we know exactly what it's like for the young people in their local area, because we've learned that it's very different if you're in Manchester to if you're in a rural ex-coal mining community in Nottinghamshire. So we don't make sweeping statements about need. And as we've gone through, we've been very fortunate to be well supported, particularly by Sport England in the last 4 years with our Doorstep Sport Club funding. But what's really surprised us is that most of the organisations we talk to say that it's not about money. They don't come to us because we've had money that we've been able to share with them. They've come to us because we're able to share expertise, we're able to share support, and we're able to share things that on a practical level, day to day, make their lives a lot easier. I just thought I'd put this slide up because I like the fact that we decided to invent our own region. So nobody else has a South Central region that I'm aware of, which is the one down the bottom there, but we decided it's too far from the west of London all the way down to Cornwall, so we put in our own little region in between the two. But it's important that, from our point of view, disadvantage exists everywhere. Again, there is often an issue around people considering that a lot of young people who are disadvantaged live in the big cities. We do an awful lot of work in rural parts of Cornwall, rural parts of Cambridgeshire, with organisations that need that help. And we also work with colleagues like Simon, County Sports Partnerships and others to make sure that local organisations on the ground get the support they need. This is not about us telling you how wonderful we are. These are some of the findings from our network survey. But what it does talk to is the point that was made earlier about the critical understanding of the customer and who you're trying to provide local sporting offers for. When people in our network tell us that we want the same things for their young people that they do, that shows us that what we're doing is aligned to what they need at a local level. It shows us that the insight work that we do when we commission pieces of research really adds value to what they can then do to get more people playing in a local community. So, for those of you who haven't seen it before, it's just some images of Doorstep Sport. Doorstep Sport is very much informal. It's not about skills and drills. It's not about what you would recognise if you came into a traditional sports club. It's very much youth-led. It's about the way that the young people want their sport to be delivered in their local areas. And we talk about it in 4 different ways. The first thing is that it needs to be at the right time. Any of those of you with teenagers may well recognise this image, because there's all the evidence that shows that actually teenagers do lose energy and don't want to get up first thing in the morning. But putting on sessions in the areas we work in at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, not a winner. Finding the rhythm of teenagers' lives, particularly in this case, is really important, but equally that's applicable across the board. When is the right time for people to play their sport and get involved in physical activity? The right place. Barry's just been talking about in the locality. This is crucial for us. If some of the barriers are about not having money, not having access to a car, it is no use if the nearest sporting offer is 3 miles away in a leisure centre. And actually we know, and it terrifies me sometimes when I talk to young people about this, that the horizons of a lot of the young people we work with are very narrow. Their lives are confined often to 1 square mile between their home, the shop, the school and the park. We had 19-year-olds that we took to the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow in 2014 who had never left their estate. And they went up the motorway through the Lake District and they'd never seen a sheep alive before. Now, you find that hard to believe in 2016, I did, but it's real. So understanding that the right place for these young people is the right place for them, not where you want to put the activity on or we want to put the activity on, is absolutely crucial. And sometimes it doesn't look the greatest. Like sometimes there'll be a terrible looking games area right next to a shiny new building, but they'd rather be on the games area. We want to move them to feel like the shiny new building is theirs eventually, but to start with, it's where they're most comfortable. The right price is, as you would expect, quite critical, but we didn't understand how critical until we went through this piece of research. If you work from right to left on this slide, you'll see how much was spent on leisure in the whole of England in 2012, and then it breaks down into how much gets spent in a low-income household per annum of £133 compared to £528 in the average household. That means that families with low incomes are spending £2.55 a week on sport and active leisure. That's generally not enough to go swimming once. So one of our greatest challenge is to work out how we can provide sport in a way that addresses that need. And very often that means that 73% of the organisations we work with provide free activity. But interestingly, 27% don't. They often don't charge very much, but they start to think about how they sustain things, so addressing that challenge. And then the final part of this is about the style, the right style. And it's interesting listening to the behaviour continuum. Very often the activities that work well as engagement in doorstep sport have nothing to do with sport at all. So there's some images on the screen here of some of the girls involved in our Us Girls programme. Very often they come into sport through doing beauty and lifestyle things in youth centres. They'll come in, they'll do a nail session. After a couple of weeks, the person who's working with them will say, oh, do you fancy trying a bit of dance? And I think as sport, we need to think about what is that preparation stage, because it's not always, it is for some, but it's not always going and getting the bit of kit you need in order to go and access your first activity. There may be other routes into sport and physical activity that are just as applicable. So, in terms of doorstep sport clubs, we've over the last 3 years, we've managed to work to place 1,000 new clubs on the doorsteps of young people. And that hasn't been easy for a number of reasons, working with 335 organisations, really diverse. Everything from housing associations, small voluntary youth sector organisations, to large urban local authorities. We consider ourselves sector blind because actually what we want is the right organisation to do the work for that local community. And in some cases it's one person on an estate. In other cases it's the Leisure Trust because they're really well tuned in to what's going on in their local communities. But over those 4 years, 83,000 participants, that's still less than 10% of the 14 to 25-year-olds in England who are living in the most low-income households. So it's huge, but it's still scratching the surface in terms of the challenge. Working with girls, we set ourselves a target of 40% when we started. It's very hard. For those organisations who don't have a culture of working with young women and girls, it takes a lot of input and support to get the mindset right, to get the offer right, to get the feel right for when the engagement piece of work happens. Some organisations find it natural, and actually what we're starting to find is we need to go and find the organisations who engage with women and girls first and then add the sport, because changing it from the other end can be really quite challenging. Working with disabled young people has been really challenging for us as well. I think it's fair to say that the biggest challenge for the organisations we support is that they don't know where to engage with young disabled people. I think we're pretty good on the whole at adapting the activity we provide when they get there, but actually how do we find the places, and we're talking to EFDS a lot about this now, how do we engage young people into the sessions? And we're extremely fortunate, but again I don't think the challenge is over, that we've managed to really engage well in terms of of BME participants, and we are overrepresented in terms of the areas we're working in. But so much of that is down to something I'll talk about in a moment. So for those of you who haven't seen it, you may want to have a further look at this. Us Girls is the programme we developed a few years ago, which is around working with non-sporty and semi-sporty girls to get them engaged in sport and physical activity. And it takes a different approach. As with throwaway comment was made when we first put the bid in, you don't just put a skirt on your male participation. That's really serious for us. We've had to work out what are the skills and resources that you need in order to effectively engage women and girls in areas of disadvantage. Because what we did find was a lot of them were hanging around watching the boys. But it's moving from there into them participating that has been the particular challenge. So from our point of view with the new strategy, there's some great opportunities in terms of thinking about new skills that people are going to have to learn, a new style of workforce in terms of doing this engagement in a way that suits the needs of new people we want to get in, and actually new delivery agencies. So I mentioned housing associations. We already do some work with them, but they are right in the heart of local communities. If people want things locally, they are a great organisation to be working with. Working with homeless organisations. If we're talking about the most inactive and the most vulnerable, some of the work that we've done in Manchester actually with Chapter 1 of the housing homeless providers here, has had a real impact in moving people from doing nothing to doing something. We all, I think, who work in sport need to open our minds at this point, as Barry said, while the strategy is still not yet finished, to think about who are these new partners, who are the people who are going to help all of us to get people more active through sport in the next few years. And in terms of our findings around the outcomes within the strategy, we know from the participant survey that we conducted last year that, as it says, for 70%, doorstep sport clubs are the only place they were active apart from in school or college. 69% have been more active as a result of coming and getting involved in something in their local neighbourhood. So maybe they've started going off as they're older teenagers and independently running. We try and help them to go and independently get involved in using the gyms in the local area and breaking down some of those perceived barriers to physical health. There's a level of confidence that young people are telling us about that grows through being involved in sport at a local level that is tailored to their needs. And it's since coming to the Doorstep Sport Club that they've been able to identify that significant increase in confidence and motivation. And in terms of maintenance, those two are critical. If you feel confident about something, you feel you're motivated to do it, you're more likely to maintain the habit. From a mental well-being point of view, they tell us that they're happier, which is nice to hear, but critically that they do feel more satisfied with their lives as a result of being involved, and that things feel more worthwhile. Because actually, as a father of a nearly teenage daughter, the words "I'm bored" or "it's boring" come out far too often, but actually something that gives a sense of purpose and sense of something that's worthwhile can be extremely powerful. I just want to talk, before I finish, about volunteering. We are delighted that volunteering gets its own space in the Sport England strategy. This is the Volunteer Equity Index, if you haven't seen it before. This is about what is norm, is that white line in the middle, which is the average for 16 to 25-year-olds around volunteering. And everything that sits below that norm is proportionally people who volunteer less. So you will see that young females from low-income areas are virtually at the bottom of this column. Young males from low-income areas are further down the column. We know that to sustain sport, to develop sport, to deliver sport, volunteers are crucial. And that addressing of underrepresentation in volunteering will be crucial to us being able to deliver sport and physical activity in the areas we work in going forwards. We've done a lot of work with volunteers. We've worked with 14,000 over the last 10 years. Not us personally, of course, the organisations we support. And what's crucial about those volunteers is that they haven't been recruited and deployed. So they've not been named on a board in a volunteer centre, come and help out in your local community. They've been grown from within the participant base. So they've shown a bit of an interest, and we haven't labelled them straight away and said, have a t-shirt, you're a volunteer. We've given them the opportunity to try things and become volunteers almost by stealth, which I think is, given the connotations that young people have with volunteering, is probably the way to go. I won't touch on that, I shall let you have a look when you get the pack. The challenge, to finish. For me, the biggest challenge is about the workforce. Sport is about people, for me. It's about how individuals interact with each other. It's about how we reach new audiences, how we achieve new outcomes, how we develop new approaches with new deliverers. Because we know that our workforce is half coach, half youth worker, and probably something else as well. Because it does pick up on some of the fundamentals of sport, but it also understands that critical element of fun. It understands that actually it's not always about a pathway. A destination can still be a local community. It understands that the difference that sport makes can happen right where young people are. It doesn't mean moving on to somewhere else. The fifth right that we've just added this year to our right place, right time, right style, right price is the right people. So what was it about Melvin and Gary? Well, Gary is a young volunteer from one of our projects in Glasgow. He was himself in a Young Offenders Institute. His brother was in prison, and he found that through volunteering at a local sporting project right in his neighbourhood, he could get to the point where he managed to get new skills, he got sports qualifications, he now has a job in sport. He's the kind of role model that is going to inspire the next generation. And the guy with the big grey beard is my role model. Because I was an 11-year-old who didn't play sport. I'd been shouted at by my primary school head teacher while playing right back in the rain to a level that meant I absolutely detested sport. But this person got me involved in outdoor activity and mountaineering. And the difference, I believe, and the challenge for all of us is about how do we find these people, because it's not just Melvin and Gary, it's Melanie and Gail as well. And how do we grow this group of people to help us deliver what we want to deliver going forward? Thank you.